We turn now to Allan Lichtman. He is a distinguished professor of history at the American University. His Keys to the White House model has correctly called all but one U.S. election since 1984. He's on the record before the debate predicting Kamala Harris to win. Allan, welcome again to the program. We appreciate it. Look, we've just seen this high-stakes debate for both candidates. Has anything you've seen changed your prediction?
Absolutely not. And by the way, I would say 10 out of 10 because the wrong man was elected president in 2000 in Florida, as I proved in my report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which is still on their website. But I'm not here to relitigate 2000. I deliberately made my prediction before the debate because I wanted to get across to people of the U.S. and the world my big message. It's governing, not campaigning, that counts. And the events of the campaign are not going to switch my prediction that Kamala Harris will be a path-breaking president, the first woman president of the United States, cracking, if not shattering, of course, the glass ceiling.
Allan, of course, I understand you've called it for Harris, but polls and other forecasts and forecasters suggest a very tight race at this point. Your model, of course, disregards the polling data. So how do you think this debate and the performance that we've seen from these candidates will influence public perception of Harris moving forward? This was a really important moment for her to define herself and her candidacy.
Look, take the polls and do with them what the great philosopher David Hume said you should do with works of superstition. Consign them to the flames. They're snapshots. They're not predictors. They're abused as predictors. And time and again, in 2012, 2016, 1988, they've led us down the primrose path of error. And the error margin is far greater than the plus and minus 3% that they tell you because they don't take into account non-response, people lying, people not focusing, and they haven't even voted yet, so they have to guess who the likely voters are. So I have absolutely no truck with the polls. I offer my keys as tapping into the fundamentals of how American presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And certainly nothing in this debate would shake my prediction of a Harris win. In fact, I thought this was a terrible debate for Donald Trump, just as it was a terrible debate for Joe Biden last time. Trump rambled. He got baited time and time again by Harris, trying to relitigate the Central Park Five, talking about his crowd size, talking about people leaving his rallies. And then what I think will be maybe the only thing, because he was so incoherent, that people will remember because they can understand it, is his ridiculous claim that undocumented immigrants are attacking and eating people's pets. Can you imagine someone who wants to be president of the United States saying and doubling down, in fact, on something that absurd? And, you know, his handlers kept telling him, focus on the economy, focus on the policies, don't get distracted. And it didn't work. He finally, in the 11th hour and 59th minute, made what I thought was a good argument, but it got totally lost. And that is, if you got all these great plans, why didn't you implement them in the 3.5 years you were in office? That should have been his theme throughout, not a throwaway line when people have already tuned out and the closing statements. And by the way, you know, it's not
Allan, you
scientific.
make a really interesting point there. Look, Allan, I mean, you make a really interesting point there, and you are correct to say that Trump, of course, did put forward a number of falsehoods and misleading statements, but at the same time, it shouldn't have been hard for the former president here. Harris has only been in the race for 7 weeks, and she's had a really limited time to define herself and her candidacy and win over voters. So you say there were some swings here, some hits for Trump, some misses, of course, but some hits. Where was he able to take advantage on stage, in your view? If you put aside some of the negativity you've just said, where did he come out on top?
I thought, you know, if you're going to say who the winner was, it was clearly Harris. She was far from perfect. I thought she missed a lot of opportunities, such as to cram home the idea that Donald Trump has cited as his model Viktor Orban in Hungary, one of the worst dictators around the world, who snuffed out his political opposition and destroyed the free press. But overall, I thought she painted a much clearer, more coherent picture than Trump. It's not scientific, but the Washington Post surveyed 24 undecided voters. 22% of the 24 thought Harris won. Only 2 thought Trump won. It's not scientific, but when you get, over 90%, even in a skewed sample, saying that Harris won, I think that tells you something.
Allan, just before I let you go, also important to point out the fact that this debate was held in the key battleground state of Pennsylvania. So how much of an impact could this event have on voters there and in other key swing states? Do you think it could shift the balance in what is already a very, very tight race? At the end of the day, it's all going to come down to voter turnout and what happens in those swing states, right?
I would quote the great Zen sentiment: unask the question. You cannot predict elections by trying to figure out what's going on in the swing states. That's what led to big errors, for example, in 2016. I've already made my prediction, not based on the attempt to parse out pieces of the electorate, but on the simple integral parameters that for 40 years have decided elections. And that is the strength and performance of the White House party with the big message: it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. So I don't think that's a question you should be asking me.